His name in the Bible was Zaphenath-Paneah. And you may not believe it, but it's one of the most well-known stories in the whole Bible. The Old Testament experience of Zaphenath-Paneah. Now, in case you're thinking to yourself, Lonnie, I must be a Bible illiterate. I've never heard of Zaphenath-Paneah. Let me tell you something. I can almost guarantee that you've heard this story before. But just so that we don't have to both keep stumbling over a 6-syllable moniker like this one all the way through the book, why don't we simply call our hero Joe? In fact, that's our title, A Kid Named Joe. Now, you can start reading the story of Joe in the 37th chapter of Genesis. Joe spent his childhood in a large family. In fact, he had 11 brothers and a sister. His father, for some complicated family reasons involving the dilemma of having 2 wives simultaneously, picked out Joe as his favorite son. Joe was Daddy's boy, and everybody in the clan knew it. Well, already you're probably saying, sure enough, this sounds real familiar. And you're right. His name really was Joe, at least Joe for short. As we read through the first 11 verses of chapter 37, we find that some less than effective parenting goes on here. Joe's mother, Rachel, is dead. And partly because she was the favorite wife, Jacob the widower goes out of his way to treat Joe better than the others. He spoils him. He pampers him. Joe gets a Christmas coat from Saks Fifth Avenue, while all the other older brothers, they get a secondhand leftover from the Goodwill wagon. Little things like that can, start to add up. And the Bible tells us very openly that family relations in this home aren't too good. Genesis 37, verse 4. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. But there's an interesting dynamic that we find so early on in this famous old story. This is a Bible experience with a happy ending, but it begins with some very shaky performances. We've got a dysfunctional home here, a father with 2 wives and 2 mistresses. So you have 4 women jockeying for position, 12 sons and all sorts of half-brother mixtures. Leah with 6 boys and 2 sons from each of the other 3. This isn't a family. It's a TV sitcom. One other factor, Rachel, the favorite wife, had died during childbirth. So there is a power vacuum. Jacob the father makes some major mistakes. And even Joe is presented in Act 1 with a couple of character gaps. Well, he's a good kid, obedient and loyal to Dad, but he's also a stool pigeon, bringing Dad bad reports about his brothers. That's in verse 2. And as I already mentioned, he's spoiled. He's got a silver spoon in his mouth, and sometimes he manages to get his foot in there as well. For example, he has a couple of dreams. You can read his account in verses 7 and 8. And these dreams seem to hint that someday in the future, all his brothers will bow down to him. Now, of course, you and I have the advantage of being able to skip ahead and read the end of the story. Sure enough, later on in the plot, that's exactly what happens. These 2 dreams come true. Maybe they're even sent by God as a kind of prediction. But our friend Joe hasn't got enough good sense to keep this kind of story to himself. I guess we all have dreams that don't bear repeating, and we pray for the wisdom to know when to keep our midnight insights to ourselves. But Joseph, both times, calls a press conference and tells his brothers that someday they're going to be bowing down at his feet. Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it. Genesis 37, 6 and 7. Now, for some reason, this story doesn't set well with his brothers: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, and Zebulun. Later, Joseph has another dream in which he sees the sun and moon and 11 stars bowing down to him. When he tells his family this dream, even his father has a word of rebuke for him. Chapter 37, verse 10. Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you? Now here's my point. This story of a kid named Joe, better known as Joseph, comes to us out of a dysfunctional confusion. Out of bad parenting emerges a story of triumph and heroism. God can turn bad beginnings into incredible endings. We don't have to be imprisoned by our past. It's something to keep in mind as we turn the pages. And now we get to the exciting point. Jacob sends his favorite son, Joe, out to the faraway field where his brothers are tending the flocks. Now remember, the brothers can't stand the sight of this kid. He's already ratted on them once. And when they look up and see him coming, they all have the same reaction. Oh, great. Brace yourselves. Here comes that dreamer. Their first reaction is almost too vicious to be believed. Let's kill him. They hate their own brother that much. Well, fortunately, Reuben, the oldest, has at least a shred of morality. No, he says, let's not take his life. We'll just throw him into this empty pit, this well down here. Thinking to himself, later when it's dark, I'll go and rescue him and send the kid back home to Dad. So they grab their own brother, tear off the Saks Fifth Avenue coat of many colors, and throw Joe down into the well. Now, Act 2. Some Ishmaelite slave traders from Gilead come by. And another older brother, Judah, says, listen, guys, what do we gain if we kill our own brother? After all, he is our own flesh and blood. Let's sell him instead and get something for ourselves out of it. And that's what they do. The sons of Jacob sell their own brother Joe for 20 shekels. They don't just sell him out. They sell him, period. Since the youngest, Benjamin, is back home with Dad, they sell Joseph and score a profit of 2 shekels each. Pretty small potatoes, wouldn't you say? What next? Well, you can read in verses 31 and 32 how they then killed a goat and dipped that fancy coat in the blood and then took it to Dad, knowing full well that it would break his heart. These 10 boys, slaves to their own petty jealousies and hatred, were willing to stick the knife right into their father's heart and then twist it and turn it. Now you have to wonder how low a person can go, don't you? Let me say again, one of the most triumphant of all Bible stories begins like this: hatred, then the contemplation of murder. That's followed by a despicable betraying, selling your own brother as a slave, and then the crowning sin of all, to lie and break your own father's heart. Incredible. Listen, friend, don't ever say, my family's beyond saving. They're hopeless. My husband is so no good he can't be rescued. My kids are so far down the river of sin, there's no way back. Our marriage is so messed up that God himself couldn't put a patch on it. The story of a kid named Joe is one of the ringing stories of what God can do. And through the saga, we're going to see God moving behind the scenes, setting things up for his own victory. Already his own plan is in motion. We can't see it yet. Joseph on the back of that camel, headed for a life of slavery, sure can't see it yet. But God is on the move. His hand is over it. Right now, let's focus on our hero, Joe. On the back of that camel, riding the slavery express into Egypt. Remember, he's just a kid, a spoiled kid. He was a mama's boy. And when mom passed away, he became a daddy's boy. True, he's got a good heart, a core of belief in God, but there's a lot of thin-skinned baby in him too. Consider for a moment his emotional state. He realizes, probably for the first time in his life, just how much his older brothers hate him, all 10 of them. They'd come within a whisker of killing him, and they didn't hesitate 2 seconds before selling him as a slave. His own brothers couldn't stand the sight of him one more day. So there's that to think about. His mother is dead. His dad, he's never in his life going to see dad again, or Benjamin, his younger brother. In fact, if you trace the probable route of that camel caravan, it's very likely that Joe passed right by the hills where he knew his father's tents were. So near, and yet so far. Have you ever felt totally alone? Absolutely without a single friend? That's how Joseph had to have felt at that moment. And what lay ahead? The word Egypt was a totally foreign concept. Joseph had never ever been there. Step by step, that camel was taking him into a future experience that was bleak and ominous mystery. He didn't have a clue what to expect, except that he was going to be a slave. And most of the time, slave isn't the best of destinations. What did this kid named Joe have to hang on to? What was there left for him? No family, no identity, no future. And yet, something incredible happens on the back of that camel. Joe, short for Joseph, faces a crossroads while on that camel ride to Egypt. Before that Gilead cavalcade arrives at its destination, he picks out his destiny. He changes from a boy into a man. He becomes an active agent in the scheme of God, which sweeps across the pages of ancient history. We'll look at the rest of the drama next time. But right now, let's return to today, in the 2020s. Broken homes, dysfunctional families. It's really not that much different. Those who feel alone don't need to be. Those who feel abandoned still have a friend. Those who feel that events have spun out of control just need to hang on and know that God is still weaving his tapestry. Your life and my life can be a part of the picture he's already chosen in his mind. All we have to do is to say what Joe did and do what he did.